He came in for nothing more than a meal, just a quiet steak at the end of a long week. A man who had served his country, worn the uniform, carried its weight. But inside that small-town diner, he wasn't seen as a veteran. He wasn't even seen as a customer. With just a few whispered words, his world shifted from comfort to danger, and the air around him turned cold. What could a single sentence do to unravel a lifetime of dignity? And who in that room wanted him gone so badly? But Clarence had no idea. The real test was only just beginning. Every Friday, like clockwork, Clarence pulled into the same spot outside the Roadhouse Grill. His truck rattled to a stop, his flannel shirt neatly pressed, and his veteran's cap tilted low. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of where he'd been. Inside, the routine never changed. Ribeye steak, house fries, collard greens, and sweet tea. To the other patrons, he was just another regular, a man who valued his ritual. But to Clarence, it was more than dinner. It was stability, a piece of peace carved out after years of carrying battles no one else could see. Yet even in that familiar booth by the window, he couldn't shake an old habit, eyes scanning the room, back to the wall, watching. And tonight, that instinct would prove more necessary than ever, because the comfort of routine was about to collide with a truth he couldn't ignore. What Clarence didn't know was that this dinner wouldn't end the way it always had, and someone in that room was already planning to make sure of it. The waitress wasn't the one Clarence expected. Not Bernice with her bracelets and booming laugh, but someone younger, unfamiliar. Her smile stretched thin, her notepad clutched like it might slip from her hands. Emily. That was the name stitched on her tag. Clarence gave his usual order, nothing more. But instead of walking away, she lingered, glancing over her shoulder like the room itself was pressing on her. And then, in a whisper so faint it could have been mistaken for air, she warned him. "They don't want you here tonight." At first, Clarence thought he misheard, but the look in her eyes told him she wasn't making small talk. He followed her gaze to a shadowed corner booth. 4 men sat there, their attention fixed not on their meals but on him. One with tattoos coiled around his arms, another with a smirk that looked rehearsed, the other 2 broad and silent, like hired muscle without the paycheck. Their stares weren't casual. They were the kind of stares Clarence had seen in other times, other places, before patrols went wrong, before tensions snapped into violence. The restaurant's hum carried on, laughter, clinking glasses, country music soft in the background. But for Clarence, the air had shifted. His meal was no longer about routine. It was about survival. Emily returned briefly, setting down his tea. Her hands trembled as the ice rattled in the glass. She leaned closer, voice still hushed, repeating the warning. This time, it wasn't a mistake. Clarence asked her quietly, "Who's they?" She didn't answer. Not fully. Her eyes darted toward the corner booth again, then back to him. Her silence said more than words ever could. And just like that, Clarence's ritual was cracked wide open. He'd fought through deserts, endured battles that left scars inside and out. Yet here he was, back home, in his own country, still needing to measure the weight of every glance, every silence, every whisper. Minutes stretched, heavy and slow. Clarence sat straight, his eyes flicking between Emily and the booth. He didn't touch his tea. His instincts sharpened, the ones that never really left a soldier. He scanned the exits, the bar, even the bus boy who had stopped sweeping long enough to watch. Something was brewing. He could feel it pressing against the walls of the roadhouse. Then it happened. The seat across from him shifted. A man lowered himself into it without asking. Broad-shouldered, buzz cut too sharp, grin too slick. Logan Mercer. His name came out like an aftertaste Clarence didn't want. Logan leaned back, casual on the outside, but his words carried venom. He spoke about comfort, about how some folks just don't mix well, about how certain regulars preferred the place a certain way. He didn't say it plain, but he didn't have to. The meaning was clear. Clarence wasn't welcome, not because of his food order, not because of his seat by the window, but because of who he was. Clarence held his ground. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. Years of discipline had taught him restraint, but inside, the insult stung deeper than Logan would ever know. This wasn't about steak. It was about being erased in plain sight, reduced to a problem in a place he'd made part of his routine, his peace. Emily's warning had been no exaggeration. The tension had teeth now. Every word between Logan and Clarence carried the weight of unspoken threats, and every eye in that corner booth followed closely, waiting. Clarence excused himself briefly, stepping away just long enough to test the waters. When he returned, the booth was empty, but Emily had vanished too. That silence hit harder than the words Logan had thrown at him. Clarence scanned the room, unease prickling his skin. Something wasn't right. Moments later, he spotted her outside, cornered in the alley by Logan himself. Her arms folded tight, her voice raised just enough to carry. She wasn't backing down. Logan towered close, spitting threats, reminding her who really held power in this town. Emily stood firm, but the fear in her eyes betrayed the truth. She was risking more than her job by warning Clarence. That was when Clarence stepped forward, his presence breaking the stalemate. Logan's arrogance faltered, but only for a moment. He left with words that weren't just threats. They were promises. This wasn't finished. Inside the roadhouse, Clarence sat again, but the taste of routine was gone. The weight of what had just happened pressed heavy against his chest. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every whispered warning ignored, every silence chosen over courage. Emily had risked everything to speak up, and now both of them were marked. But the night wasn't done, because what came next would push Clarence and Emily into a confrontation neither of them could walk away from. If Clarence thought the danger ended with a few whispered words, he was wrong. The real fight was waiting just around the corner. The alley reeked of grease and summer heat, but all Clarence could feel was the weight of eyes on him. Logan hadn't left. He hadn't backed down. He'd only regrouped. This time, it wasn't just words. 3 men from that corner booth flanked him now, their boots grinding gravel, their presence closing in like a tightening vice. Emily stood frozen near the back door, pale and trembling, trapped between fear for herself and guilt for pulling Clarence into this storm. Logan's grin was gone. In its place sat something sharper, meaner. "You don't get it, old man," he hissed. "This ain't your place." It never was. His voice was low, but the menace in it cut like broken glass. The others didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their fists clenched, their shoulders squared, their message as clear as the summer night air. Clarence wasn't supposed to walk out of here with dignity and tact. For a moment, Clarence said nothing. He didn't reach for a phone, didn't move toward the door. He just stood his ground, shoulders squared, cap casting a shadow over his eyes. He'd survived ambushes in desert nights, stared down enemies with rifles in hand. But this moment felt heavier, because these weren't strangers on foreign soil. They were men from his own town, men who decided that his presence alone was enough to be a threat. Emily's voice broke the silence, shaking but determined. "Leave him alone. He's done nothing to you." Her words rang out into the alley, fragile yet defiant. Logan turned on her fast, his anger shifting like a whip. "You think anyone's gonna protect you when this is over?" he spat. "You think speaking up makes you brave? All it makes you is next." Clarence stepped between them before another word could land, his frame steady, his voice steady, but edged with steel. "You don't scare me. And you sure as hell don't scare her." That line hung in the air, sparking something dangerous. One of Logan's men stepped forward, knuckles tightening, the promise of violence seconds away. The alley seemed to shrink, sound fading into the thud of Clarence's heartbeat. In that instant, he realized this wasn't just about his seat by the window, his Friday steak, or even Emily's job. This was about history repeating itself. Unchecked hate festering until it spilled into the open, daring anyone to resist. Clarence braced himself, every nerve alive. He knew the price of standing tall when the world wanted you small. He'd paid it before in different ways, but this time, the battleground was a restaurant alley, and the weapon wasn't a gun. It was silence. If he backed down now, Logan's victory wouldn't just be over him. It would be over every person told they don't belong. Emily's gasp snapped through the tension as Logan raised a hand, not to strike, but to signal his crew. And in that moment, Clarence understood. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a message meant to break him. But Clarence wasn't built to break. The alley held its breath, the night balanced on the edge of eruption, and what happened next would decide whether this was just another whispered story swept aside, or the moment everything changed. The alley didn't explode into fists or broken bones. It ended in something colder: silence. Logan and his men finally backed off, not because they'd changed their minds, but because they'd made their point. They wanted Clarence to know he was watched, measured, and unwelcome. And with that, they disappeared into the dark, leaving behind the echo of a threat that didn't need repeating. Emily stood there shaking, relief mixing with dread. She knew what came next: rumors, retaliation, the quiet punishments people like Logan specialized in. Clarence placed a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her in that moment. "You're not alone," he said softly. He meant it, but he also knew the weight of those words. Promises like that came with a cost. Inside the restaurant, the rhythm of plates and chatter carried on like nothing had happened. But for Clarence, the room had changed forever. His ritual meal was no longer a refuge. It had been turned into a battleground. The steak arrived, steaming and perfect, but the taste was gone. Because what happened in that alley wasn't about food, it was about power. About how easy it was for hate to wear a smile tip-heavy and sit comfortably in the corner until someone dared to call it out. For Emily, it was a choice she couldn't take back. She had spoken up, and in a place where silence kept the peace, her voice had broken through. For Clarence, it was a reminder that even after decades of service, after giving his youth to defend a flag, he could still be reduced to a target over something as simple as a seat by the window. And for us, watching their story unfold, it is a reflection of something larger. How many times have voices been silenced in back rooms and alleys? How many warnings have gone unheard until it was too late? The injustice Clarence faced that night isn't unique. It's stitched into the fabric of countless lives, repeated in different towns, under different lights, always carrying the same weight. Clarence walked out of that roadhouse with his head high, but the truth followed him. This wasn't over. It never really is, because racism doesn't always roar. It whispers, it lingers, it waits in the corners of everyday life, daring someone to notice. The question is, will we? How many more men like Clarence, how many women like Emily, will stand alone while the rest of us look away? And when the silence breaks, when the truth forces its way into the open, whose side will we be on? This story doesn't end at a dinner table in Georgia. It's still happening, everywhere. The only question left is, what are we going to do about it?